Hello and welcome to Bisnomics, your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. I'm Tharandu Amarasekara. Sri Lanka is going through an energy crisis. We are facing power cuts, we are facing fuel shortages. Energy seems to be the most heated debate and the most debated topic in the country. In fact, not just in Sri Lanka, but in the region and in the world as well. The answer may be in renewables, solar power, wind power. But how serious are we as a nation on this? Every time when we face energy shortages, yes, we talk about renewables. This could have been done. That should have been done. Now, worldwide, wind power is being used to generate energy, and the total capacity of wind power is said to be somewhere slightly above 800 gigawatts. At the same time, we see that solar power is getting close to 1 terawatt. And for a world that's consuming somewhere close to 15 terawatts, these are, I would say, quite significant increases or growth of renewable energy. But let's talk about Sri Lanka today. Are we doing what is required? Do we have a proper policy for this sustainable renewable energy? And to discuss about this, we have a very special guest joining us, who is none other than Mr. Manjula Perera, the Managing Director of Windforce PLC. Mr. Manjula Perera, absolute pleasure to welcome you to Bisnomics and happy to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Tharandu.
Mr. Manjula, I'd like to start off by asking, as at now, what kind of a power requirement does Sri Lanka have? Like, as at now, the electricity and power generation structure of Sri Lanka, how is it structured, and how much of that is coming through renewable sources such as wind power and other clean energy sources? Let's start by getting the picture out there.
Tharandu, now there are two ways to define the power requirement in the country. That is the installed capacity in megawatts, and then the other one is on the energy wise. So first I will touch base on the installed capacity of different technologies in the country. The first is the large, we call them the large hydros. We have about 1,400 megawatts of installed capacity coming from large hydropower plants. Then second is thermal power plants, that is diesel plants, heavy fuel plants, and the coal power plants. So all these three together is about 2,168 megawatts. And the balance is we call it the non-conventional renewable energy power plants. That is wind plants, solar plants, then small hydropower plants, as well as the rooftop solar power plants. All those four technologies together is about 1,200 megawatts. Also, all in all, it's about 4,800 megawatts is the installed capacity of power sector in the country. I told you that there is thermal power plants of 2,168 megawatts, which is creating the crisis in the country at the moment. When you break it, this 2,168 megawatts, 900 megawatts is coming from the Noracholi coal power plant, and 635 megawatts is coming from CB-owned diesel and heavy fuel power plants, and about another 630 megawatts is coming from private sector-owned diesel and heavy fuel power plants. And if you look at that is the power capacity, then from this power you get the electrical energy. The whole requirement in the country, if there are no power cuts, is about 17,000 gigawatt hours per annum. If you break this 17,000 gigawatt hours, about 5,400 gigawatt hours is coming from the coal plant. That is 32% of the requirement of the energy is coming from the coal plant, which is in Noracholi. So we are highly dependent on coal power. Then another 3,400 is coming from diesel power plants. So that's about 20% of the requirement is coming from diesel plants. Then about another 3,000 gigawatt hours is coming from heavy fuel power plants, which is about 16%. So, and the hydropower plants contribute about, the large hydropower plants contribute about 20% of the energy requirement. And these non-conventional renewable energy power plants, wind, solar, small hydro, biomass, and the rooftop solars are all together is contributing about 2,200 gigawatt hours, which is 13% of the requirement. So when you add on all this, you can see that more than 65% of the energy requirement is coming from thermal power sector in the country. Only about 32% to 35% is coming from renewable energy sector.
Indeed, much less than what we would like, isn't it, Mr. Perera? Now, I would like to ask you in terms of harnessing the wind energy. Now, there has been a lot of discussions about this, a lot of talks about this. What does it really take, not to get too technical here, but what does it really take for us to harness the wind energy and use it for our power generation and energy sector requirements? Just to brief us, and maybe in a very layman's term.
Yeah, I will first go back to the history of what happened in the history of in the wind power sector in Sri Lanka. The first pilot sector wind power plant was set up by the utility, that is CB themselves, in 1998 in Hambantota, which was a very small plant of 3 megawatts. And that was a complete disaster because they set up the at a wrong location for wind, and they selected wrong technology. So everyone thought since 1998 there is no room for wind power development in Sri Lanka. But in year 2003, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory of USA did a comprehensive wind study for Sri Lanka. And that study showed the potential of wind potential in Sri Lanka as 20,000 megawatts. So that opened the eyes of all the people in the sector. So thereafter, in year 2008, the sector was open for private power developers to set up wind power plants. So that's how since 2008 the industry grew. Even though the National Renewable Energy Authority Laboratory report says 20,000 megawatts, that is 20,000 megawatts of wind potential, but not everything, this complete 20,000 megawatts can be converted into wind power, because, for example, the complete coastal belt from Puttalam to up to Jaffna is one of the best areas for development of wind. But we have forest reserves. The Vilpattu the reservation covers majority of this coastal belt. So you can't develop, even though it's good for wind power development, you cannot develop in that area. So therefore, the actual wind which can be converted to wind power in the country is about 5,000 megawatts. That is onshore. That is when you build wind plants within the country. But in addition to that 5,000 megawatts, we have offshore wind. Where you can develop wind plants in the sea. For that, Mana Basin and Hambantota are identified as best areas for offshore wind power development. There again, you can develop about another 5,000 megawatts on the offshore. So in total, there is potential in the country for development of about 10,000 megawatts of wind power. But what has happened as the actual development to date is from private sector is only about only 148 megawatts. By the utilities themselves is about 100 megawatts. So altogether, close to 250 megawatts is the development since 2008.
Mr. Perera, when we consider some of these developments with regard to renewable energy, now, when you laid down the structure, it was very clear that we are not making the full use of the potential we have for wind power. And my question to you is, you did mention that some of these diesel-based private power generation units are there, and that's one of the sources of energy as well. And we hear the rallying cry and complaint from the stakeholders in the industry that there is still preference being given to the diesel-based power generation parties over developing renewable energy. This is a bit of a tough question, but I'm sure you will be honest in your reply. Are some of these stakeholders who are quite keen on diesel and fuel-based non-renewable energy generation, are they sabotaging efforts towards renewable energy in this country?
It was more of a sabotage than a policy decision that blocked the renewable energy industry. I told you that the renewable energy wind plant development started in 2008, but the small hydro and the renewable energy industry was open to the private sector in year 1996. Since then, the development was based on a feed-in tariff, where the utility published the tariff for different technologies every year, and whoever has the technical capacity, who can identify a site, do the feasibility studies, get the approvals, and who has the funding could develop a project. So that's how rapidly the wind industry, wind, solar, as well as the small hydro industry grew in the country to about 1,000 megawatts level. But unfortunately, in the year 1995, in year 2013, there was an amendment to the Electricity Act. So this amendment, there was a mistake while doing the amendment in some of the sections. So citing that, in year 2015, the utility stopped development of renewable energy, saying that as per the Act, they cannot offer development of renewable energy power plants based on this feed-in tariff. And they proposed to go ahead with tendering process. As far as you look at transparency-wise, tendering process is a very nice process where everyone bid for the pricing, and whoever get the lowest bidder will get it. But the issue with that was, in that case, all the work which was done by the developer himself, that burden comes under the utility. So utility first has to identify a site. You can imagine for CB to do that, they take about CB or the Sustainable Energy Authority, they take about 1 to 2 years to find a site. Thereafter, they have to prepare a tender document, another 1 year. Thereafter, they have to do the evaluation of the tenders. In Sri Lanka, that again takes about 6 months to 1 year. Then only it is awarded to the developer, and developer takes about another 2 years. So for a project to materialize from the inception will take more than 5 years. So that's what happened since 2015. Only about 4 or 5 small renewable energy projects got executed. The whole industry collapsed. But fortunately, lately the authorities realized this, and very recently you all would have seen in the media few weeks ago, the present Power and Energy Minister again revised the Electricity Act back to the previous situation where the renewable energy could be developed under the feed-in tariff. Now that the blockade, the restriction has been taken out, we are hopeful that the industry will get fast-tracked in the near future.
And Mr. Perera, before we go in for a short break, just to ask regarding the feed-in tariff that you explained, how does that exactly work?
Yeah, the feed-in tariff is formulated by a tariff committee comprising the Ceylon Electricity Board, Sustainable Energy Authority, then Central Bank, then Finance Ministry, the Power and Energy Ministry themselves. So all these stakeholders come together, and there are tariff formulas based on the cost base of each and every technology. So those formulas were approved by the cabinet in the past. So what the tariff committee has to do is to change the parameters based on the current situation in the country. For example, the capital cost of a wind power plant, they will review to see the present cost of a wind power plant. Then they look at the USD exchange rate, then the Colombo Consumer Price Index, then the interest rate prevailing, and based on all these parameters, they change the parameters to the latest figures and come up with the tariff for each and every technology. For example, for wind, when they put all the parameters, they come up with a tariff of say 20 rupees per kilowatt hour. Then for solar, maybe 15 rupees per kilowatt hour. Once they publish these tariffs, if I have a site and if I have the technology to do that, and with that tariff, if I feel that it is financially viable for me to do a wind power plant at a reasonable return, so first thing I have to go is to the Sustainable Energy Authority, that is the renewable energy main body, and make an application with a feasibility study report. Then they will evaluate and give me the provisional approval, which is the first approval to start a project approval process. So we obtain all the approvals, sign the power purchase agreement, and start developing the project. So it's a very simple process to fast track renewable energy development.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Mr. Perera. Stay tuned. We will be back after this short break. This is Bisnomics. Welcome back to Bisnomics. We are in conversation with Mr. Manjula Perera, Managing Director of Windforce PLC, regarding the potential for renewable energy, especially wind energy for Sri Lanka. Mr. Perera, let's talk about offshore wind projects, because I believe that this is one of the key areas which so many countries around the world, even in Europe, are actually considering, because I believe the whole world is searching for answers for the current energy crisis, because though it feels like only we are affected by an energy crisis, I think this is becoming a worldwide phenomenon now, especially with the threat of Russia closing off the gas supplies to Europe. Even Europe is now hunting for renewable energy solutions. My question to you, talking about wind energy, offshore wind energy projects, what exactly is that, and how does that work, and what potential does it offer for Sri Lanka, especially given the fact that we are an island?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the offshore wind potential in Sri Lanka is about 10,000 megawatts, about 5,000 megawatts in Mannar Basin and 5,000 megawatts in Hambantota area. So the technology is where you set up the wind power plants on the sea itself. When you set up a wind plant on the sea, the average wind speed on the sea is quite higher than when you have an onshore wind power plant. Say, for example, in Sri Lanka, on an average wind site, the onshore wind site, the plant, we call it the plant load factor, what you can harness is about 32% to 35% energy at that particular site. But when you go offshore, what you can harness is about 45 to 50%. So that means you will have almost double the energy coming from the same wind turbine when you are at offshore. But there again, there is cost involved. When you have offshore, you have everything is in the sea. So you need ships to transport the equipment. Then you have to do undersea piling, then submarine cables. Then maintenance is not that easy. So there is cost as well as benefits. But all over the world, when the onshore potential exhausts, they move to the offshore wind potential. But when it comes to Sri Lanka, we have not even harnessed the onshore wind potential, which is abundantly available. Then the other restriction with the offshore wind is the minimum size of an offshore wind plant should be at least 500 megawatts. So if we are to have multiples of 500 megawatt wind plants, offshore wind plants, it is quite big for the Sri Lankan system. In that case, it is a must that Sri Lanka need to get connected to India through a submarine cable or overhead line. Then we will be part of a very big electrical network. If we are not connected to such a large network, absorbing large wind plants will be a challenge for a small country like ours.
Understood. And I think you very clearly laid out the technical challenges there as well. And thank you very much for that. Mr. Perera, let's talk about some of the recent projects which we have seen, some of the renewable energy projects which were handed over to overseas firms. Now, the question is not about whether we should be handing it over to overseas firms or whether we should be allowing foreign investors or not. I'm sure you are quite pro foreign investment, and we as a media company, we too are quite pro foreign investments. We do believe that a country needs foreign direct investments in order to move forward, and that's my personal belief as well. But the question here is about the process. Do you think a fair and justifiable process was followed in handing that project over to an overseas firm?
I mean, there for larger projects, there was a proper process identified and carried out in November last year. For projects above 50 megawatts, the government called expression of interest from all the renewable energy developers, local and foreign. There was almost 600 applications for this expression of interest. Out of that, the Ministry of Power, together with the Sustainable Energy Authority, shortlisted 105 projects. And out of that 105 projects, they asked those 105 developers to submit detailed feasibility reports to give them the approvals. And as I know, to date, out of that 105 projects, 24 projects have submitted feasibility reports, and they have been given the approval as well. So this particular foreign company you are referring to also applied for this expression of interest. So if they came through that same process, it would have been it's a very transparent method, but their pricing was far higher than the other developers applied for this the expression of interest. Therefore, they didn't get the approval for that. So that is why they opted to use the G2G option and come through the different path. I mean, we don't have any issue, as you said, foreign direct investment coming into the country, but as you correctly said, it should have been through the correct path.
Absolutely, and that was the concern that even myself as a talk show host would have, because when you look at the process, it's very clear that they've come through outside external influence, which is not the way proper foreign direct investment should ideally take place. So we are with you on that concern as well, and we just want to clarify that fact, Mr. Perera. Now, talking about the government policy for renewables, there's a lot of talk and smoke, but the question is, do they have enough fire for it? Talk about wind, talk about solar. Mr. Manjula Perera, are you happy with the current government policy for renewable energy? Or is it like so many other sectors, is it the common perennial problem of there being a policy with hundreds of pages, but very little being in implementation? What is the current situation with regard to renewable energy and sustainable energy in Sri Lanka?
As I explained earlier, policy was not right since 2015, but it was corrected last month. So policy-wise, there is no issue at the moment. It is open, up to whatever the capacity, it is open to whoever the developer has the capacity to develop renewable energy projects. But the challenge now is something else. The renewable energy sector has not been paid by the utility since September last year. So for 9 months, we have not been paid. So the total accumulated payment to the renewable energy sector is about 26 billion Sri Lankan rupees. And as developers, we have developed projects 70% borrowing from the local banks. So our exposure to the renewable energy sector exposure to the banks is about 60 billion rupees. So overall, there is 86 billion exposure at the moment due to non-payment by the utility. So now the sector has been opened up to fast-track the renewable energy sector, but we have not been paid. And the banks are not willing to fund for new renewable energy projects because they know that we will not get paid. So first thing the government have to sort out is to settle the outstanding debts to the renewable energy sector. Once that is settled, only the banks will be comfortable to lend to us again for us to develop new projects. And this has become a very serious issue at the moment because CB is a highly debt-ridden organization. Hopefully now the consumer tariff revision is on the table, where the PUCSL has published and given 21 days for public hearing. Upon that, the revision taking place, CB will be in a much better place than where they are today, but not all the problems will be solved.
It's a shocking number to hear, Mr. Perera, that first of all, that for 9 months they haven't paid. I think it's extremely unfair by the players in the renewable energy sector. Don't get me wrong, but to me it sounds a little bit like a deliberate administrative or bureaucratic tactic done in order to discourage the renewable sector. Am I wrong to think so?
No, you are absolutely right, Tarindu. We are also of the same confusion because the Ceylon Electricity Board average selling price of energy is at 17 rupees per kilowatt hour, and their average cost of generation is close to 50 rupees per kilowatt hour. And as renewable energy developers, we are selling energy to the CEB at an average cost of about 15 rupees. So what the utility is doing is they are buying from the renewable energy developers at a cheap price of 15 rupees. Then they sell the electricity to the consumers. They collect the money from the consumers and use that money to buy fuel. And not pay us. We supply the cheap power, but not get paid. They buy fuel and run diesel generators. So there is something wrong somewhere.
I would say, yet another unfortunate mismanagement aspect from the side of the CEB. That's what it's clear to me from what you said as well, Mr. Perera. We are going to come back to you on more details on that. We will be back after this short break. This is Bisnomics. Welcome back to Bisnomics. Our focus today is on the renewable energy sector of Sri Lanka. Are we doing enough, and what needs to be done to strengthen this sector further? And we are in conversation with Mr. Manjula Perera. Mr. Perera, talking about the actions needed from the side of the CEB and the other power generation related authorities in the country, especially towards adoption of cleaner energy like solar, wind power. What do you think, what more needs to be done? And for example, we are a country blessed with sunshine for almost the entire year. And we see some countries like in Europe that doesn't have the level of sunshine that we do. They are doing a lot more towards harnessing the power of solar and using it for their energy requirements. Now, what exactly is going on? We do hear certain comments being made saying, okay, it's not a stable source of power and etc. like that. There are various comments being flown around by various parties. But what is the main reason behind the lack of adoption of solar power? Is it a matter of science, or is it the usual matter of corruption and politics? What are your thoughts on this?
The policies are of course in place. Now, the present government already gazetted also that by 2030, 70% of the energy should be coming from renewable energy. So that includes large hydros as well. So as I mentioned earlier, only about 20% is coming from large hydros, 20 to 22%, and 13% from renewable energy. So at the moment, we are at about 35%. So it's a long way to go from 35% to 70% within a period of already this 2022 is also gone 8 years. So the utility themselves have calculated that about 4,500 megawatts of renewable energy should be added to the system if we have to achieve this target by 2030. Out of that 4,500, 3,000 to come from solar power and 1,500 to come from wind power. So plans are there. Only thing is the implementation. The last month policy also, the Electricity Act also changed. Everything is in place now to fast track the process. But the bottleneck at the moment is the bankruptcy of the utility. When the utility is running at a severe loss of about 500 billion, they have estimated the loss to be 500 billion this year. When the utility is running at a loss of such scale, nobody would be interested in investing in the power sector. So it is high time that the restructuring of this loss-making utility be unbundled and restructured and market-driven like the telecom sector. I mean, in 1990s, you could remember how difficult it was to get a telephone and a telephone connection and how expensive a telephone call was. But they unbundled the telecom sector and created the market-driven system. And today it is one of the cheapest commodities and the latest technologies compared to any other Asian country. We have the latest technology in the telecom sector. When you look at the power sector, we are far behind all the other Asian countries in the technology-wise. And the utility is loaded with 25,000 employees, which can, could run with about 10,000 employees. So the most important thing is the restructuring of the utility and at least make it a market-driven organization and so that the developers can invest with a confidence.
Mr. Perera, would you be able to enlighten us on some of the environmental impacts of renewable energy? For example, I believe that due to the world using the initially mentioned amount of renewable energy, wind energy itself, I believe somewhere close to about more than 800 gigawatts worldwide. I believe that around 1.02 billion tons of CO2 emissions were avoided due to the adoption of wind power. So like that, what would be the environmental benefits, and are there any successful international countries you would like to share as success stories in the adoption of wind power?
I mean, the environmental impacts is minimal when you get into renewable energy, except the hydro sector. Hydro sector has some environmental impacts when they're during the construction stage, because you have to build dams and canals and stuff. When you look at wind and solar, there's hardly any environmental impact. The only environmental impact is during in the construction of the equipment itself by the manufacturer. So the calculation have shown that, like, when you make a wind turbine, you use fossil fuels and all to manufacture that. So the calculation has shown that the payback of that much of environmental impact is covered within about a 6 months of period of generation of electricity. For example, from a 10 megawatt wind power plant, you save about 30,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions per year. In fact, if you look at companies like us, we have registered our carbon credits, and recently most of our power plants, we sold the carbon credits at 2.5 US cents per ton of emissions. So we have been able to bring in foreign currency also through these carbon credit savings. There was another second question asked by you, right?
Correct. Basically, any international countries that you would like to share success stories in the adoption of renewable energy? I believe some of the countries like Netherlands, for example, they are having a lot of initiatives.
Yeah, Netherlands, then Germany. I mean, if you take UK, the offshore wind development is very high. I mean, all over Europe, the renewable energy development is at extremely high levels. Germany, sometimes in some months they run about 70 to 80%, even 100% on renewables. They can go at even 100% because they are an interconnected network. The whole of Europe is interconnected. So intermittency issues are not there for them, because when, for example, when Germany is producing 100% with renewables, there is some other countries, say, for example, France is running on nuclear power. So those balances off. So I mean, you can't compare 100% those countries with ours, because we are an island. That's why I said that it is very important for us to connect to India for future large-scale development of renewable energy, because we have much more potential to develop renewable energy than for our consumption. So if we have the India interconnection, we have enough potential even to export renewable energy.
Would nuclear qualify as a renewable energy source, Mr. Perera? And what would be any implications of adopting nuclear energy in Sri Lanka?
nuclear energy is not a renewable energy source, but it is the most cheapest and most cleanest among all the thermal energy technologies when you compare with diesel, heavy fuel, then coal, LNG. Above all that, it is the cleanest and the cheapest form of generation of nuclear energy.
Understood.
The biggest challenge is if you are to have a nuclear power plant, you have to have a 25-kilometer radius cleared from the nuclear power plant itself. So for a small country like ours, you can imagine to have a 25-kilometer radius inundate, that is not a easy thing. And our even now our population density is even higher than that of India.
Correct.
But otherwise, as a technology, it's the best out of the thermal.
Understood. On a final note, Mr. Perera, I would like to ask from you with regard to the job sector, because there is I believe there will be a lot of young students, young professionals who are watching this program and who want to know, is there career progression in this sector? Are there opportunities to grow my career in this sector? What would your input be in terms of, especially for our budding engineers, budding scientists, what kind of job opportunities are we looking at into the future?
I mean, renewable energy is the future, not only in Sri Lanka, all over the world. I mean, thermal power generation is becoming obsolete. Like large companies like GE and all, who were the pioneers and leaders in thermal power generation, are becoming, they are closing down their factories.
And Mr. Perera, sorry to interrupt, but I believe that a recent report a few months back showed that some of the renewable energy companies in the world are actually more valuable and they generate more profitability and revenue than some of the oil companies in the world.
I'm not updated on that, but should be because of the expansion. Like if you look at the last 5 years, only the renewable energy companies have been growing all over the world. And also the additions to the power sector all over the world. I mean, wind and solar has been in the scale of 20 to 30% increase per annum. So the thermal is negligible compared to these two technologies. So that is the future. And also technology-wise, it is the fastest changing technology. For example, 3 years ago, a solar panel could generate, a single solar panel could generate only about 300 watts as the peak output. The same size panel can generate 600 watts per watt peak today. So from the same area, you can harness double the energy within a period of 3 years. And it is moving at a very fast rate. So that is like engineering wise, that is the place to be. The renewable energy sector is the way forward.
Mr. Manjula Perera, it was an absolute pleasure and honor to have hosted you today in Bisnomics. You shared so much of valuable information, especially at a time that the whole country is considering about renewable energy and asking the question, why are we not going more towards renewable energy? I think you gave the very clear answer on how important this sector is, how it can contribute to the power generation, and also how cost-effective renewable energy can be to Sri Lanka. And we sincerely hope that the right authorities heard you today and that steps will be taken to settle the dues to the renewable sector and encourage further investments and growth in this sector of our country, because we all know how valuable this sector is towards the future economic development in Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for joining us and wish you all the best.
Thank you, Taninder. Thank you so much for inviting. Thank you for the time.
Renewable energy, it is the way forward, it is the future. But hopefully, sooner rather than later, all the authorities, all the main sectors of the government which have the responsibility of crafting a proper energy policy and putting that policy into action will come together and work with the renewable energy stakeholders and drive our country's energy strategy towards making it more inclusive with better prominence towards renewable energy. That is the economy, the country that ourselves as well as our future generations truly deserve. I'm Tharandu Amarasekara, and no matter what business you may be in, try to consider how can you make your approach towards managing energy for your business more renewable as well. I'll see you with the next episode. This is Bisnomics.